Welcome to Dolphin Dive Daily, your go-to spot for everything Miami Dolphins. If you bleed aqua and orange, hit that subscribe button and join the pod. Ever since Mike McDaniel took over as head coach of the Miami Dolphins in 2022, there has been a fascinating mix of promise and frustration swirling around the franchise. On one hand, McDaniel has guided the team to a 28-23 record across 3 seasons, earning 2 playoff berths in the process. That's not insignificant in a league as cutthroat as the NFL. On the other hand, the Dolphins have yet to win a single postseason game under his leadership. While the offensive numbers and regular season bursts of excitement are undeniable, critics argue that Miami has hit a ceiling with McDaniel's approach. His personality, lighthearted, quirky, and relatable, has won him fans among players and media alike. But at the same time, detractors wonder if that demeanor lacks the grit needed to transform a talented roster into a legitimate contender. That tension came to a boiling point after a joint practice with Detroit. That practice against the Lions became an instant talking point around the league. Multiple reports suggested that Miami wasn't just outplayed, they were flat out embarrassed. Pundits described it as one of the most lopsided joint practices they had ever witnessed. While Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown sliced through Miami's defense with ease, the Dolphins' quarterbacks, Tua Tagovailoa and Zach Wilson, were overwhelmed, throwing interceptions and suffering sacks at an alarming rate. For fans who have bought into Miami's flashy, high-octane offense, this was a harsh wake-up call. The performance raised concerns about preparation, intensity, and most importantly, toughness. Practices don't appear in the standings, but in the NFL, they're often used as a measuring stick of culture, and when the perception becomes that a team is soft or unprepared, it sticks. That's exactly why former NFL head coach Eric Mangini's comments hit so hard when he weighed in afterward on the national stage. Mangini, who has been around the league long enough to recognize red flags, made it clear that if he were in McDaniel's shoes, this practice would be a nightmare scenario. Speaking on Colin Cowherd's show, he didn't hold back. He highlighted that Miami has faced accusations of being soft in the past, and this latest showing only reinforced that narrative. According to Mangini, the last thing any coach wants is for outsiders to say his team isn't physical enough or lacks the ability to endure through adversity. He drew a connection to Miami's recent history, where hot starts have fizzled into disappointing finishes. In 2022, the Dolphins began 8-3, only to stumble to 9-8. In 2023, they were 11-4 before dropping 3 straight, including a playoff loss in Kansas City. That inability to close out seasons is exactly the kind of symptom critics associate with a soft culture, and Mangini believes ownership has noticed. For Steve Ross, the Dolphins owner, this isn't just about football, it's about reputation. Ross is known as a tough, successful businessman who has invested heavily in building Miami into a premier franchise. Hearing whispers that his team is considered soft would be unacceptable for him, and Mangini was quick to emphasize that. Owners in the NFL don't just want winning teams, they want teams that reflect their own image, and Ross has never been accused of lacking toughness or resilience. If the Dolphins are publicly labeled with such a damaging word, the pressure inevitably trickles down to the coaching staff. That's where McDaniel's fun-loving, almost quirky style may backfire. While fans and media might appreciate his authenticity, the people writing the checks might start questioning if his approach is truly the right fit. Mangini believes Ross is already having those thoughts after watching how things unfolded against Detroit. The irony in all this is that McDaniel's style has at times been exactly what Miami needed. His offensive creativity turned the Dolphins into one of the most exciting teams to watch, leading the NFL in total yards in 2023. When things click, the Dolphins can look unstoppable, spreading defenses thin with speed and precision. But the downside of leaning so heavily into finesse is that it creates questions about whether the team can stand toe-to-toe in a physical slugfest. The NFL playoffs are rarely about pretty statistics. They're about surviving cold weather, winning in hostile environments, and grinding out tough drives. Miami has failed in those moments under McDaniel. That's why the joint practice humiliation stings so deeply. It wasn't just about being outplayed. It was about confirming every doubt critics already had about the Dolphins' identity, and perception in this league can snowball faster than reality. Adding fuel to the fire were comments from Detroit linebacker Grant Stewart before the practice even began. He essentially questioned Miami's toughness, saying he wasn't sure they prepared the same way the Lions did. That was bulletin board material, if ever there was any. Yet when the Dolphins had the chance to prove him wrong, they came out flat, unprepared, and outmatched. In a league where words carry weight and rivalries thrive on respect, failing to back up your toughness is one of the worst optics possible. Instead of silencing Stewart, Miami seemed to validate his criticism with their performance. Reporters later joked that even in the minor scuffle at the end of practice between Jamison Williams and Ifeatu Melifonwu, the Dolphins came out on the losing end. Symbolic or not, the perception that Miami couldn't even win a practice fight piled onto an already rough narrative. Colin Cowherd, never one to shy away from provocative takes, pointed out something sharp during the discussion. He argued that any report other than Miami is soft would have been better for McDaniel. Even if the Dolphins had been accused of being overly aggressive, getting into too many fights, or being out of control, that narrative would have played better than being labeled soft. In football culture, chaos is forgivable. Weakness is not. That's why the label hurts so much, because it strikes at the core of what teams believe they must embody. Cowherd's words underscored the idea that McDaniel's reputation is now fighting against an image he cannot afford to have associated with his name. Perceptions stick, and in the high-stakes environment of the NFL, sometimes perception dictates opportunity as much as results on the field. What makes this situation more precarious is that the Dolphins were already walking a fine line with their recent history of late-season collapses. Fans can tolerate setbacks if they feel progress has been made, but when the same issues repeat, fast starts, strong stats, but weak finishes, the patience begins to wear thin. McDaniel was once seen as the fresh, innovative mind who could modernize the Dolphins' attack and finally push them past mediocrity. Now the narrative is beginning to shift. Instead of being the coach who revolutionized the offense, he risked being seen as the coach who couldn't toughen up his team when it mattered most. If the joint practice humiliation becomes a preview of the season, it might not matter how creative his playbook is. Owners and fans will start asking whether someone else is needed to establish a harder, more resilient identity. Of course, it's important to remember that this was just a joint practice in preseason. The score doesn't matter, the stats don't count, and the games that decide legacies are still ahead. But in the NFL, optics matter. Coaches and organizations are judged by how they respond to moments like this. If Miami rebounds with strong play, this practice will be nothing more than a footnote. But if they stumble again late in the season or bow out early in the playoffs, critics will point back to Detroit and say the writing was on the wall. McDaniel's challenge now isn't just about scheming up the next big offensive play, it's about reshaping his team's identity. Can he make the Dolphins as tough as they are fast? That's the million-dollar question, and the answer could decide his future in Miami sooner than expected. For now, McDaniel remains both a symbol of hope and a lightning rod for criticism in Miami. His personality makes him easy to root for, and his offensive acumen makes him hard to dismiss. But the NFL is a results-driven league, and narratives shift quickly. One day you're the young genius who redefined the team, the next you're the coach whose roster can't finish what it starts. The Dolphins' ownership, led by Steve Ross, will have to decide how much patience they have left. Fans are restless, the media is circling, and the season ahead feels like a make-or-break campaign. If Miami delivers, McDaniel will be praised for weathering the storm. If they falter again, this practice against Detroit might be remembered not as a blip, but as the beginning of the end for his tenure. The stage is set, and the pressure couldn't be higher. Still with us, then show some love. Hit that like button and let us know in the comments, what's your take on the Fins this week? TYREEK Hill is officially out of the Miami Dolphins, and the NFL world is still trying to wrap his head around this jaw-dropping news. Fans woke up to alerts flashing across their phones, headlines screaming about a blockbuster trade that nobody saw coming. Hill has been one of the most electrifying players in the league since arriving in Miami, redefining what speed and explosiveness could look like in Mike McDaniel's system. To see him suddenly packing his bags and leaving South Beach is not just surprising, it's shocking. The Dolphins had built so much of their offensive identity around him. turning him into both a deep ball nightmare and a yards after catch machine. Now, without him, everything feels uncertain. Questions immediately began flooding social media. What went wrong? Why did this happen now? And most importantly, how could Miami let their biggest star walk away when the championship window seemed wide open? Rumors are swirling from every corner of the league about what may have led to this blockbuster move. Some insiders whisper that tension had been brewing between Hill and the front office, especially regarding his future contract demands. Hill, already one of the highest paid wide receivers in the NFL, reportedly wanted further guarantees and an even larger deal to stay long term. On the other side, the Dolphins are said to have grown cautious about committing so much of their salary cap to one player, even one as transformative as Hill. The timing of the move is strange, considering Miami had just reinforced its roster to make a serious push in the AFC. Yet, in the ruthless business of professional football, money talks louder than highlight reels. Whether this was a preemptive financial strategy or a breakdown in trust, fans feel blindsided, and analysts are left scrambling to make sense of a transaction that changes the entire landscape of the conference. The shockwaves of this trade extend far beyond Miami. Opposing defensive coordinators who had spent sleepless nights trying to find ways to contain Hill are now reworking their playbooks with relief or dread, depending on where he lands. His mere presence on the field forced defenses to stretch and adjust in ways that open lanes for everyone else, from Jalen Waddle to the Dolphins' running backs. Without him, Tua Tagovailoa faces a far different challenge, proving he can lead a high-powered offense without the league's fastest weapon constantly bailing him out. Critics have long claimed Tua's numbers were inflated by Hill's unique ability to turn even short passes into game-breaking plays. Now that narrative will be tested head-on. For fans, it's not just about losing a superstar, it's about losing the very identity of their team. The Dolphins' offense, which had become must-see TV every Sunday, suddenly feels incomplete, stripped of the lightning that made it terrifying. Of course, attention immediately shifts to where TYREEK Hill could be headed next. The rumor mill has linked him to several franchises, each with its own storyline. Could he reunite with Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City, creating the most dangerous duo in football all over again? Could he land with Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets, intensifying an already heated AFC East rivalry? Or maybe a dark horse like the Baltimore Ravens, pairing Hill's speed with Lamar Jackson's explosiveness? Every scenario feels tantalizing, and every potential destination sends fans of those teams into a frenzy of speculation. For Hill, this next chapter could be career-defining. Leaving Miami may sting, but he instantly becomes the crown jewel on the market, capable of tilting the balance of power wherever he lands. This uncertainty is exactly what fuels the rumor-driven culture of the NFL, making this trade one of the most captivating in years. Miami, meanwhile, faces a daunting reality. Without Hill, the franchise has to reassess its trajectory and how it intends to remain competitive in a brutally tough AFC. The Buffalo Bills remain perennial contenders, the Jets have retooled around Rodgers, and the Chiefs are still the dynasty standing tall. Where do the Dolphins fit now? They invested heavily in Tua, but removing his top weapon might expose him in ways the front office never anticipated. Jalen Waddle is a phenomenal talent, but expecting him to shoulder the entire receiving load is asking for trouble. The running game has been inconsistent, and the defense, while improved, cannot win games alone in today's NFL. Fans who just weeks ago were dreaming of a Super Bowl run now find themselves wondering whether the team will even have enough firepower to secure a playoff berth. The optimism surrounding Miami has evaporated overnight, replaced with anxious doubt. The business side of this decision cannot be overlooked. NFL front offices constantly balance the thin line between paying stars and building sustainable rosters. Hill's demands, if reports are true, may have simply been too steep for Miami's long-term plans. Committing monstrous money to one player often means sacrificing depth elsewhere, and championship windows close quickly when depth disappears. Still, cutting ties with a generational weapon is easier said than done, especially when he was the face of your franchise. This move screams of cold, calculated strategy by the Dolphins management, prioritizing flexibility over fireworks. Yet fans rarely care about balance sheets. They care about wins, highlights, and the thrill of watching superstars dominate. For them, losing Hill feels like betrayal, proof that the front office doesn't share the same urgency they do. The gap between financial logic and emotional connection has never been clearer, and Miami's ownership will feel the heat. Tyreek Hill himself has remained largely silent since the news broke, adding more fuel to the fire of speculation. A few cryptic social media posts suggest a mix of shock, excitement, and maybe even frustration. That's the nature of today's sports world. Every emoji, every repost, every lyric quoted becomes a clue for fans desperate to understand what's going on behind the scenes. Hill has always thrived on energy and attention, so it's only a matter of time before he tells his side of the story. When he does, it could either vindicate the Dolphins' decision or expose a rift that will haunt them for years. Players of Hill's caliber rarely leave quietly, and every word he speaks will ripple through the league. Until then, silence only builds anticipation, turning his next press conference or podcast appearance into must-watch drama for fans and critics alike. From a legacy perspective, this trade could reshape how both Hill and the Dolphins are remembered. For Hill, leaving Miami after such a short but impactful stint raises questions about loyalty, stability, and how he will be viewed among the great receivers of his era. Was his time in Miami just a flashy interlude, or will it be seen as a crucial stepping stone to greater heights elsewhere? For the Dolphins, this may mark a turning point, either a bold decision that opens a path to smarter team building, or the catastrophic mistake that derails years of progress. Legacy in sports isn't built only on wins and stats, but also on how franchises handle moments of crisis. Fans, historians, and analysts will look back on this moment as one of the defining pivots in Miami's modern era. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the judgment will not be kind if results don't follow. The league itself benefits from this kind of chaos, as shocking trades inject fresh drama into every conversation. Talk shows will dissect every angle. YouTube creators will flood timelines with theories, and fans will argue endlessly in comment sections about winners and losers. It's the nature of the NFL. Unpredictability sells, and no one can resist debating the ripple effects of a superstar changing teams. Hill's exit becomes not just a Miami story, but a league-wide spectacle. The AFC playoff picture has shifted. Fantasy football drafts are already scrambling, and rival fan bases are dreaming of what it would mean to see Hill in their colors. The NFL thrives on headlines that feel larger than life, and this trade delivers exactly that. Whether Miami likes it or not, they've given the football world a storyline that will dominate until the season kicks off. At the end of the day, TYREEK Hill leaving the Dolphins feels like the kind of moment fans will remember years from now. A where were you when piece of NFL history. It's shocking, controversial, and drenched in mystery. Was it about money? Was it about chemistry? Or was it simply the brutal reality of professional football, where loyalty takes a back seat to long-term planning? No matter the reason, one truth remains. The Dolphins without TYREEK Hill will never look the same. His speed, swagger, and star power turned Miami into must-watch television. Now, all that's left is uncertainty. For Hill, a new chapter begins, one that could cement his legacy even further. For Miami, the road ahead feels treacherous, filled with questions they may not have answers for. And for the rest of us, all we can do is sit back, watch the rumors unfold, and marvel at the unpredictability of the NFL. That's a wrap for today's dive. If you're loving the content, share it with a fellow Dolphins fan, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a splash. Fins up!